Welcome in, and thanks for winding down with me tonight. Let's get comfortable, slow our breathing, and drift back to the very first steps of the Pokemon journey. Quiet corners, tiny details, and the gentle trivia tucked inside Pokemon Red. For so many of us, this game was a doorway to a bigger world, and even after all these years, it still hums with secrets worth noticing. As you listen, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and which Pokemon game you'd like me to explore next. And if you enjoy these late night deep dives, tap subscribe so you don't miss the next adventure. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's wander through Kanto at a sleepy pace. No rush, just soft footsteps, warm memories, and one quiet fact at a time. Pokemon Red was first released in Japan on February 27, 1996. It arrived quietly on the gray screen of the Game Boy, a tiny cartridge that would end up changing gaming forever. At first, few realized just how ambitious it was. A living world packed into 1 megabyte of memory, filled with 151 creatures waiting to be discovered. Released alongside its twin version, it marked the birth of what would become one of the most beloved franchises on Earth. For many players, that single date wasn't just a release day. It was the beginning of a lifelong adventure. In Japan, Pokemon didn't start with Red and Blue. It began with Red and Green. The pairing might sound unusual to Western fans, but it reflected the natural world, the color of fire, and the color of life. Each version offered subtle differences. Certain Pokemon appeared in one, but not the other, encouraging friends to trade using the Game Boy Link cable. It was a simple idea that turned the games into something more than single-player experiences. The connection between Red and Green wasn't just in data, it was in friendship, discovery, and the shared excitement of exploration. When Pokemon crossed the ocean to reach Western audiences, something changed. The Japanese Green version was replaced with Blue, a choice made partly for marketing and partly for presentation. Blue, with its cleaner sprites and smoother colors, looked more polished than Green's rougher early designs. The developers at Game Freak and Nintendo of America believed Blue would better capture the attention of players abroad. The shift might seem small, but it subtly altered the way the world remembered Pokemon's origins. To many outside Japan, it was Red and Blue, the iconic duo that started it all. This regional difference means that when players in the West think back to their first Pokemon games, they imagine Red and Blue. But in Japan, nostalgia has a different shade: Red and Green. It's a quiet split in memory that reveals how global Pokemon truly became. Children in Tokyo and Osaka grew up catching Caterpie in Green's slightly grainy forests, while players in America and Europe explored the same world through the smoother Blue version. Different colors, same journey. No matter the version, every player stepped out of Pallet Town with the same sense of wonder. The sprites in Pokemon Green were a product of limitation and experimentation. Drawn by a small team with strict hardware constraints, many early designs appeared uneven or strangely proportioned. Some Pokemon looked almost menacing, with heavy outlines and odd poses. When Blue was later released in Japan, the team took the opportunity to completely redraw them, refining details, adjusting shapes, and giving each creature a more balanced look. These updated sprites became the basis for the Western versions, meaning most players outside Japan never saw the original rough art. In that sense, Blue quietly defined the Pokémon we remember. Pokémon Red and Blue might have looked like two completely different games, but under the surface, they were nearly identical. Both versions shared the same code, map layouts, and storylines. The only major differences came down to which Pokémon could be found in the wild. This was a clever move by Game Freak. It made the two versions feel distinct without doubling the workload. Players often debated which version was better, but the truth was that they were two sides of the same coin. Together, they created a sense of community that kept conversations alive long after release. Many Pokémon were exclusive to Red, making trading not just an optional feature, but a necessary part of the experience. Players who owned Red could catch species like Ekans, Mankey, Growlithe, and Scyther, while others were locked to Blue. This exclusivity meant you couldn't complete your Pokédex alone. You needed a friend and a link cable. It was a design decision that perfectly captured Pokémon's spirit of connection. The idea that the world was bigger than your cartridge made each trade feel meaningful, almost like discovering new life through cooperation. The link cable was more than a piece of hardware. It was Pokémon's beating heart. In an era before online play, the cable allowed Game Boys to communicate directly. Game Freak realized early on that this connection could become something revolutionary, a way to trade and battle with friends. For many players, their first link cable experience was magical. Watching Pokémon travel from one screen to another felt alive, as if the creatures truly existed inside those tiny devices. It turned a solo adventure into a shared journey, one that defined the series forever. Money in Pokémon Red might seem limitless, but it wasn't. The maximum amount of Pokédollars you could hold was exactly 999,999. This odd number wasn't chosen for realism. It was the result of technical limits. The Game Boy could only store a certain number of digits, and adding one more would break the game's memory allocation. To most players, this cap was invisible, but it shaped how items were priced and rewards were balanced. Behind the scenes, Game Freak was performing mathematical acrobatics just to make the in-game economy function smoothly on limited hardware. The famous bicycle in Pokémon Red has one of the most amusing price tags in gaming history, 1 million Pokédollars. That number isn't just large, it's impossible. Since the money cap stops just below that, no one could ever actually buy it. Instead, players had to explore the world and earn a bike voucher given by a generous SNPC in Vermilion City. This clever trick ensured that the player would interact with the environment, talk to characters, and feel rewarded for curiosity. It turned a simple purchase into a small adventure, perfectly capturing Pokémon's playful spirit. Missing Number Juice, short for missing number, is one of the most legendary glitches in all of gaming. It isn't a real Pokémon, but rather the result of the Game Boy trying to access data that doesn't exist. When players performed a specific sequence of actions, the game would pull from uninitialized memory and create a strange, bird-like block of pixels. For many, finding missing numbers felt like uncovering a digital ghost, a hidden secret buried in the cartridge. It quickly became playground mythology, spreading through whispers, guidebooks, and rumors of how to summon it without breaking your game. Encountering missing numbers came with risks and surprises. When caught, the glitch could scramble the Hall of Fame records, distort graphics, and even freeze the game. The Hall of Fame, which normally stored the Pokémon of your winning team, would suddenly fill with corrupted characters and strange symbols. Yet despite these dangers, players couldn't resist the temptation. Missing Gnomeshers thus became a kind of forbidden curiosity, a symbol of mystery in a game already full of secrets. It blurred the line between programming error and legend, turning a simple glitch into one of the most famous discoveries in Pokémon history. One of Missing Gnomechapter's most fascinating effects was its impact on the player's inventory. After encountering it, the sixth item in your bag would suddenly multiply, increasing its quantity by 100 to 28. This turned Missing No into a kind of digital genie, capable of granting infinite rare candies, master balls, or nuggets to those who dared. For a generation of kids, this glitch was both a secret shortcut and a moral dilemma. Use it and risk corrupting your save, or resist and keep the game pure. It added a strange layer of choice that no developer had ever intended. The Old Man glitch, closely tied to missing numbers, revealed how fragile the game's code truly was. When you watched the Old Man in Viridian City teach you how to catch Pokémon, the game temporarily replaced your name data with his dialogue. If you immediately flew to Cinnabar Island and surfed along its edge, the game accidentally used your player name to determine which Pokémon appeared. Depending on the letters in your name, you could encounter wild, impossible creatures, including Missing No itself. What seemed like magic was really code colliding in unexpected, fascinating ways. Even moves that claimed to have perfect accuracy in Pokémon Red, like Swift or Tackle, weren't truly flawless. Because of how the game handled probability checks, every attack, no matter how sure, had a tiny chance to fail, specifically a 1 in 256 chance. This odd quirk came from the way the Game Boy calculated numbers, rounding them off in a way that left a microscopic window for failure. It was so rare that few ever noticed, but when a sure hit missed, it felt like fate had played a trick. Even perfection, it seemed, wasn't guaranteed in Kanto. In the original generation of Pokémon games, the special stat worked differently than it does today. Instead of separating special attack and special defense, both values were combined into a single number. That meant a Pokémon's ability to deal and resist special damage depended on the same stat, a design that seemed efficient at the time but had major consequences. Battles became skewed toward Pokémon with high special values, and certain types dominated as a result. This oversight wasn't immediately noticed by players, but it quietly shaped the competitive landscape of Generation 1 in powerful ways. Because the special stat governed both offense and defense, a few Pokémon became unstoppable forces. Alakazam, Exeggutor, and Starmie are perfect examples. Their high special values meant they could deal massive damage with moves like Psychic, while easily shrugging off similar attacks. Alakazam, in particular, became infamous for sweeping entire teams with speed and precision. It wasn't just strong, it was mathematically superior. This imbalance gave rise to the first meta in Pokémon battles, where strategy often revolved around exploiting or countering the sheer dominance of these overpowered special type Pokémon. Psychic types in Generation that we were in a league of their own. The stat imbalance made them incredibly resilient, but what truly broke the system was how few weaknesses they had. Ghost-type attacks were bugged to do no damage to psychic types, and bug-type moves were weak and scarce. As a result, psychic Pokemon like Mewtwo, Alakazam, and Hypno reigned supreme. Trainers without one stood little chance in competitive battles. What might have been an unintentional coding flaw ended up defining the first generation's identity, a time when psychic types ruled Kanto without question or equal. Ghost-type moves, while conceptually powerful, were nearly useless in Pokémon Red and Blue. The move Lick was the only ghost attack available, and its damage output was pitiful. To make matters worse, due to a programming oversight, ghost attacks didn't even affect psychic Pokémon, their supposed weakness. This left the ghost type, represented mainly by Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar, without a real advantage. It's ironic because lore-wise, ghost Pokemon should have terrified psychics. Instead, they were rendered harmless. This bug wouldn't be fixed until later generations, leaving an entire type stuck in limbo for the duration of Generation 1. The music of Pokémon Red is a masterpiece of minimalism. Composed by Junichi Masuda, every tune had to fit within the strict limitations of the Game Boy's tiny sound chip. There were only a handful of channels available, yet Masuda managed to create themes that remain instantly recognizable decades later, from the triumphant battle music to the haunting notes of Lavender Town. Each melody was carefully layered to evoke emotion with just a few beeps and tones. The simplicity gave the soundtrack an enduring quality, proof that even with limited tools, creativity can make magic. The Lavender Town theme has earned a reputation that extends far beyond the game itself. Its high-pitched tones and haunting melody set it apart from the cheerful tunes found elsewhere in Kanto. Over the years, it became the center of unsettling rumors, tales claiming that the song's frequencies caused headaches or strange behavior in children. While these stories are pure urban legend, they reveal how deeply the track affected players. The music's melancholy, paired with the somber setting, left an emotional imprint that's rare in video games. It wasn't horror in the traditional sense. It was quiet unease. Lavender Town is unlike any other location in Pokémon Red. Instead of bustling cities or adventurous routes, it's a place of mourning, home to the Pokémon Tower, a graveyard filled with the spirits of departed Pokémon. This idea, presented in a game aimed at children, was both bold and haunting. Players climbing the tower encountered ghostly figures, eerie NPCs, and a palpable sense of sorrow. It was the first time Pokémon hinted at loss, giving emotional depth to a world that had, until then, been bright and carefree. Lavender Town reminded players that even this universe had shadows. Before you can face the spirits in the Pokémon Tower, you need one very special item, the Sylph Scope. Without it, every ghost you encounter appears only as a flickering question mark, untouchable and terrifying. The moment you finally acquire the device and reveal the true identities of those spirits, Ghastly, Haunter, and the ghost of a Mother Marowak, is unforgettable. The Sylph Scope wasn't just a tool, it was a metaphor for understanding. What once seemed unknowable became visible, transforming fear into empathy and mystery into resolution. Few items in gaming carry such quiet symbolism. Kubone's story is one of the most tragic in all of Pokémon lore. According to its Pokédex entry, Cubone wears the skull of its deceased mother, a detail that stunned players when they first read it. The image of a small, lonely creature carrying that kind of sorrow added an unexpected emotional layer to the game. Many fans linked Cubone to the ghost of the Marowak in Lavender Town, deepening the tragedy. In a world filled with colorful battles and cheerful exploration, Cubone stood out as a reminder that even in a game about friendship, grief still exists. Deep within the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island lies one of the game's most mysterious pieces of storytelling. Scattered diary entries describe the creation of Mewtwo, a genetically engineered Pokémon born from the DNA of the mythical Mew. These fragments reveal a darker side of the Pokémon world, one where science and ambition blur ethical lines. The fact that this lore is tucked away in a crumbling building makes it even more haunting, as if players are uncovering forbidden knowledge. It's a quiet, chilling moment of discovery that adds unexpected depth to an otherwise simple adventure. The SS An stands as one of the most memorable locations in Pokémon Red. A grand luxury liner docked in Vermilion City, it represented a rare glimpse of sophistication in the otherwise humble world of Kanto. Players boarded the ship to battle trainers, collect items, and ultimately receive the HM for cut. But once the ship set sail, it was gone forever, an early example of a missable moment in gaming. That permanence gave the event emotional weight. The gentle animation of the ship disappearing into the harbor felt final, reminding players that time could truly pass in this world. After the SS An departs, a mysterious truck remains parked near the docks, a detail that became the center of one of gaming's most famous myths. Playground rumors spread that if you used the HM strength on the truck, a hidden Mew would appear underneath it. Children across the world spent hours trying every possible method, convinced there was truth to the legend. In reality, the truck served no purpose at all, left there by developers as simple decoration. Yet that tiny piece of scenery fueled years of imagination, proof of how deeply players wanted to believe. The truck itself took on a life of its own in playground conversations. Before the internet, information about Pokémon spread through word of mouth, and every rumor felt like a secret only you knew. The Truck Mew story became a shared experience. Every kid had a cousin who swore it worked. Magazines even debated the rumor before it was debunked. Decades later, Game Freak referenced the myth in remakes like Fire Red and Let's Go Pikachu, a wink to longtime fans who once searched beneath that useless truck for magic that never existed. Pokémon Red's rival battles remain one of its most effective storytelling tools. From the very first meeting in Pallet Town to the final showdown in the Indigo Plateau, your rival constantly reappears, growing stronger with each encounter. He's not just a static character, he's a mirror of your own journey. His timing is often frustrating, showing up just when you think you've mastered the game. But that's what makes him memorable. By the time you face him as champion, it feels personal, not just another battle, but a culmination of shared progress and unspoken rivalry. Giovanni serves as both the enigmatic leader of Team Rocket and the final gym leader of Kanto, a twist few players saw coming. Throughout the story, he operates in the shadows, a criminal mastermind orchestrating chaos from behind the scenes. When you finally challenge him in Viridian City, his identity as the last gym leader ties the entire narrative together. It's a clever storytelling loop. The villain who tested you indirectly becomes the gatekeeper to the Pokémon League. Beating him isn't just another victory, it's symbolic, the triumph of the student over the corrupt mentor figure who once controlled the world beneath you. The gym leaders of Kanto weren't just milestones, they were lessons. Each one introduced players to a new type matchup, teaching strategy through experience rather than tutorials. Brock's rock types forced you to understand weaknesses, Misty's water types tested adaptability, and Surge's electric types rewarded preparation. As you moved through Kanto, the gyms gradually shaped your understanding of balance and variety. This design was intentional. Game Freak wanted each badge to feel like a growth moment, both for your Pokémon and for you as a trainer. By the time players reached the later gyms, they had unknowingly mastered the fundamentals of battle. Sabrina, the Saffron City gym leader, is remembered as one of the toughest opponents in Pokémon Red. Her psychic-type Pokémon, especially Alakazam, exploited the imbalance that made the type nearly unstoppable in Generation 1. With blistering speed and high special stats, her team could dismantle opponents before they had a chance to react. Few players had strong counters, bug moves were weak, and ghost moves were glitched. For many, Sabrina's battle was the first time Pokémon felt genuinely intimidating. She wasn't just a test of strength, she embodied the mysterious, overwhelming power of the mind. For anyone who chose Charmander as their starter, the first gym battle against Brock came as a rude awakening. Rock-type Pokémon shrugged off fire attacks, forcing players to think creatively or train alternative Pokémon to stand a chance. Many turned to catching Caterpie or Mankey early just to survive. This challenge, while frustrating, became an iconic rite of passage. It taught players that type advantage mattered more than favoritism. You couldn't just rely on your starter forever. Brock's gym wasn't just about rocks and fossils. It was the game's first real lesson in humility and adaptation. Deep beneath Cinnabar Island lies the Pokémon Lab, where players can revive ancient fossils into living creatures. By bringing a helix fossil or dome fossil to the scientists, long-extinct Pokémon like Omanita and Kabuto could be reborn. This mechanic hinted that Pokémon had existed for eons before humans, tying the world's creatures to a rich prehistoric past. It also introduced early themes of science and resurrection, ideas that added subtle depth to the series' lore. What seemed like a simple side quest carried profound implications that even in a fantasy world, life and extinction were deeply connected. The abandoned Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island tells one of the game's darkest stories through scattered diary entries. As players explore its burned-out halls, they uncover notes describing scientists experimenting with the DNA of Mew, leading to the creation of Mewtwo. The tone of these entries is cold and clinical, contrasting sharply with the emotional weight of what they describe, humanity's attempt to play God. It's rare for a Game Boy title to explore moral ambiguity, yet Pokémon Red did so quietly. The mansion's silence, paired with its tragic backstory, gives it an eerie, unforgettable atmosphere. Hidden deep within the code of Pokémon Red lies evidence of ideas that never made it to the final game. Data miners and fans have uncovered bits of unused information, placeholder Pokemon entries, scrapped sprites, and unfinished concepts. Some of these designs would later evolve into creatures seen in later generations, while others disappeared entirely. These fragments offer a rare glimpse into Game Freak's creative process during development. With limited time and memory, many designs were left behind, not because they were uninteresting, but because the Game Boy simply couldn't handle them. In a way, these ghosts of data are fossils too. Before Pikachu became the face of Pokemon, the developers had other mascots in mind, and one early contender was Shelder. The idea made sense: simple, recognizable, and tied to the oceanic theme found throughout Kanto. But as the game's tone evolved, Pikachu's friendly electric energy proved far more appealing to players and marketers alike. Still, the consideration of Shelder shows how differently the franchise could have looked. Imagine a world where every lunchbox, cartoon, and plush toy featured a shellfish instead of a mouse, a small decision that changed history. Mew's inclusion in Pokémon Red was a happy accident, or perhaps a mischievous secret. After the main game had been debugged, programmer Shigeki Morimoto decided to use the tiny bit of leftover space in the code to slip in one last Pokémon. It wasn't planned or even meant to be found, but when rumors began spreading about a mysterious 151st Pokémon hidden within the cartridge, players became obsessed with discovering it. What started as a quiet inside joke among developers turned into a global legend, transforming Mew into one of gaming's most famous secrets. The amount of data used to store Mew is shockingly small, only about 300 bytes of leftover memory. That's less than the size of a short paragraph of text. Yet within that sliver of space, Game Freak created one of the most iconic creatures in pop culture. Mew's existence is a testament to the ingenuity of the development team, who managed to fit so much personality into so little code. It's poetic in a way. A tiny hidden Pokémon created from leftover fragments became the heart of the series' greatest mystery. Buried in the game's unused data is evidence that Professor Oak was originally meant to serve as a final boss battle. Dialogue and team data suggest that after defeating your rival, players might have faced their mentor one last time. His planned team included powerful Pokémon like Tauros, Arcanine, and Exeggutor, a fitting challenge from the man who started your journey. The idea was ultimately cut, likely due to time or cartridge limitations, but the concept lingers in fan discussions. Facing Oak would have completed the narrative arc perfectly, student versus teacher, ending where the story began. The unused data for Professor Oak's planned battle reveals just how formidable he was meant to be. His team included high-level Pokémon such as Arcanine, Exeggutor, and Gyarados, a balanced and intimidating roster that would have rivaled the Elite Four themselves. These choices weren't random. They represented mastery over multiple types, fitting for a seasoned Pokémon professor. Facing Oak after your rival would have been the ultimate test, symbolizing the final lesson from your mentor. Though the encounter was cut, its discovery years later gave fans a glimpse of what might have been, the perfect, poetic conclusion to the journey. Pokémon Red and Blue may appear consistent across playthroughs, but the encounter tables, the data determining which Pokémon appear in each area, vary from route to route and even between versions. Some routes favor certain species more heavily, while others are balanced for variety. These tables were meticulously designed to control pacing and difficulty. Early routes introduced common, friendly creatures, while later areas featured rarer and more powerful ones. It's easy to take for granted now, but this system ensured every region felt distinct, keeping exploration rewarding and unpredictable with every patch of grass. Every area in Kanto has its own unique encounter probabilities. That means the tall grass on one route isn't the same as the grass on another, even if the Pokémon species overlap. Some creatures have just a 1% chance of appearing, making them feel truly special when found. This granular system taught players patience and persistence long before modern games introduced visible encounter rates. It gave the world of Kanto a sense of texture, a feeling that some Pokémon preferred certain environments, just as animals do in nature. The randomness, frustrating at times, added genuine thrill to discovery. Fishing in Pokémon Red brought its own brand of surprise. Players could use different rods to access new species, from the humble old rod to the powerful super rod. The old rod, however, was a bit of a trick. It could only ever catch Magikarp, no matter where you used it. Many players spent hours believing something rare might bite, only to reel in disappointment again and again. Still, that persistence paid off for those who evolved Magikarp into Gyarados, one of the most powerful Pokémon in the game. Fishing wasn't just luck, it was a quiet lesson in patience. Dragon-type Pokémon were among the rarest and most mysterious in Pokémon Red and Blue, but surprisingly, their signature moves were almost non-existent. The only true Dragon-type attack was Dragon Rage, and it didn't scale with stats. It simply dealt a flat 40 damage every time. While that made it useful early on, it became underwhelming later in the game. This limitation reflected how experimental the developers were with the type system in Generation 1. Dragons were meant to be legendary and powerful, yet they were still bound by the hardware's simplicity. Their mystique came more from rarity than raw strength. Hyper Beam was one of the most feared attacks in Pokémon Red, a move that could end battles in an instant. Its immense power came with a cost. After using it, the attacker had to skip the next turn to recharge. This trade-off made it both thrilling and risky. In the hands of strong Pokémon like Dragonite or Snorlax, it could devastate an opponent, but timing was everything. The mechanic forced players to think strategically rather than just spamming their strongest move. Even with its drawback, Hyper Beam carried a sense of finality, a move you used to finish a fight. Moves like Wrap, Bind, and Fire Spin introduced an entirely different kind of strategy, control. Once an opponent was trapped, they couldn't attack until the move's effect ended. In Pokémon Red, these partial trapping mechanics were especially oppressive, as they essentially froze the enemy for several turns. A skilled player could cycle these moves to prevent the opponent from ever striking back. While later generations balanced this mechanic, in Generation 1 it was borderline broken. It turned otherwise average Pokémon like Victreebel or Dragonite into relentless tacticians, capable of dominating battles through patience and precision. Victory Road was more than just a final dungeon. It was a test of everything the player had learned. To progress, you needed to use strength, an HM that allowed your Pokémon to push massive boulders onto floor switches. Each puzzle demanded foresight, patience, and a bit of trial and error. The cave itself was filled with strong, wild Pokémon and powerful trainers, forcing you to balance problem solving with endurance. Reaching the exit wasn't just about defeating enemies, it was about mastering the game's mechanics. By the time players emerged into the sunlight, they had truly earned their place at the Pokémon League. The final encounter with Mewtwo in Cerulean Cave is legendary not for spectacle, but for restraint. There's no cutscene, no dialogue, and no music shift, just a silent, powerful figure waiting deep within the cave. The simplicity of that moment spoke volumes. After conquering the Elite Four and exploring the entire region, players stumbled upon the ultimate test of their skill. The lack of cinematic buildup made it feel organic, almost sacred. You weren't told Mewtwo was special, you felt it. In that stillness, surrounded by the echoes of the cave, the game trusted you to understand the gravity of what stood before you. Mewtwo's presence in Pokémon Red is powerful precisely because of what it doesn't do. There's no dialogue to explain its origin, no cutscene to dramatize the encounter. It simply exists, silent, self-contained, and overwhelming. This design choice was deliberate. After all the noise and adventure of Kanto, Mewtwo's wordless confrontation feels intimate and eerie. The game doesn't tell you who it is or what it represents. It lets you interpret it yourself. For players who knew the lore from the Cinnabar Mansion, that moment carried immense weight. Mewtwo wasn't a villain or a prize. It was a creation confronting its creator. Mew, the elusive 151st Pokémon, became one of the greatest mysteries in gaming history. It wasn't obtainable through normal gameplay, only through rare promotional events, special distributions, or the now famous in-game glitches. This secrecy turned Mew into a legend whispered about on playgrounds and in magazines. Players traded rumors about hidden methods to unlock it, from moving trucks to secret button codes. In truth, Mew's existence was a happy accident, slipped into the game's code by a developer after debugging. Its hidden status sparked endless curiosity and made Pokémon Red feel bigger than its cartridge. A game still holding secrets. The Pokédex entries in Pokémon Red weren't always cheerful descriptions of cute creatures. Many carried dark or unsettling undertones, hinting at the dangers of the Pokémon world. Entries mentioned Pokémon with powers that could freeze mountains, burn forests, or hypnotize people. Others, like Kadabra's, implied eerie origins, a child transformed by psychic energy. These small details gave the world unexpected depth, blending innocence with mystery. In a game meant for children, the Pokédex is sometimes read like a field journal from a dangerous, living world. That quiet touch of menace helped Pokémon feel richer and strangely believable. Behind the charming simplicity of Kanto's world was an impressive display of technical creativity. The developers used memory-saving techniques, like mirroring maps to make the region feel larger than it really was. Some towns and routes share the same layouts flipped or rotated, tricking the player's perception. This approach saved precious bytes on the Game Boy's limited storage, allowing Game Freak to include more content without sacrificing detail. For players, it created a seamless illusion, a world that felt expansive, interconnected, and alive, all built from clever reuse of repeating tiles and invisible boundaries. Caves and dungeons in Pokémon Red often reused the same design blueprints with subtle differences in decoration or layout. This wasn't laziness, it was necessity. The Game Boy's limited memory forced developers to repurpose existing data wherever possible. Rock Tunnel, Mount Moon, and Victory Road, for instance, share structural similarities beneath the surface. By layering different enemy encounters, lighting effects, and puzzles on top of reused maps, Game Freak created variety within restriction. To players, each cave felt unique, but behind the scenes, it was the same skeleton reused with new dressing, an elegant example of design under constraint. Many of Pokémon Red's NPCs had dialogue that broke the fourth wall in playful or surprising ways. Some directly addressed the player, offering advice that felt more like a developer's wink than in-world conversation. Others subtly referenced the growing Pokémon anime, creating early crossovers between the game and show. For example, one character mentions Brock's rock-hard willpower, a line mirrored in the cartoon. These little touches blurred the line between the Pokémon world and the player's reality. It gave the sense that the characters somehow knew they existed within something bigger, a story spreading beyond the Game Boy screen. Some non-player characters in Pokémon Red communicated through cryptic hints instead of direct instructions. Rather than spelling out what to do next, they offered fragments of knowledge, scientists scribbling in diaries, hikers muttering about caves, or locals warning of mysterious power in faraway towns. These subtle clues made the world feel alive, as though every character knew just a bit more than they were letting on. The diary entries in places like the Pokémon Mansion, for example, revealed Mewtwo's creation story without fanfare. This storytelling through implication encouraged curiosity and exploration, letting players feel like true adventurers piecing together history. When Pokémon Red and Blue were re-released on the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console, Game Freak recreated the original link cable experience digitally. The team carefully simulated the functionality that once required a physical cable, allowing players to trade and battle wirelessly between systems. This small detail preserved the spirit of the originals, the idea that Pokémon was always meant to be shared. Even decades later, the developers treated this feature with respect, understanding that it wasn't just a technical tool, but the heart of what made Pokémon special: connection, friendship, and the joy of trading across worlds. Among the many bugs buried in Pokémon Red's code is the notorious EXP underflow glitch, a programming quirk that lets players skyrocket a Pokémon's level instantly. By manipulating specific in-game values, experience points can wrap around into negative numbers that the system interprets as massive gains. The result? A level 100 Pokémon in moments. While most players never encountered it naturally, those who experimented with the game's inner workings discovered a strange satisfaction in breaking its limits. The glitch stands as both a technical curiosity and a reminder of how fragile yet fascinating the early Pokémon systems truly were. Developing Pokémon Red and Green for the original Game Boy was a monumental challenge. The system offered only a fraction of the processing power of modern devices, forcing the developers to think like magicians rather than programmers. Every sprite, sound, and line of code had to be compressed or reused. The world of Kanto, with its towns, routes, and 151 unique creatures, somehow fit into less than 1 megabyte of memory. This extreme limitation shaped the entire design philosophy: efficient, creative, and endlessly resourceful. It's part of what gives the original games their timeless, handcrafted charm. The first versions of Pokémon released in Japan, Red and Green, were famously unstable. Players encountered frequent glitches, graphical errors, and even save file corruptions. Game Freak used the feedback from those releases to improve and refine the later Blue version, which became the foundation for the Western Red and Blue launch. The improvements weren't just cosmetic, they represented a leap in polish and stability. The transition from green to blue shows how rapidly the small team learned and adapted, turning a buggy passion project into one of the most successful and enduring video games ever made. During the localization of Pokémon Red and Blue, Nintendo briefly considered redrawing all 151 Pokémon to better appeal to Western audiences. Early concepts suggested making them more cartoonish and less monstrous. However, the team ultimately decided against it, choosing to preserve Ken Sugimori's original art and the unique charm that came with it. This decision proved crucial. It maintained the authentic Japanese style that helped Pokémon stand out from other games at the time. Had they gone through with the redesign, the Pokémon we know today might have looked entirely different, losing the delicate balance between cute and strange. Every Pokémon in Red and Blue is identified internally by an 8-bit number, or index. This system worked well for the 151 official Pokémon, but because 8-bit values can represent up to 256 possibilities, dozens of empty slots were left over. Accessing these unused indices, either intentionally or by glitch, produces strange results like missing nose or other distorted creatures. These weren't deliberate secrets. They were side effects of how the Game Boy processed memory. Yet for players, they felt like discovering a hidden world, a digital wilderness beyond the edges of what was meant to exist. Within Pokémon Red's game data are unused sprites, creatures, and icons that never appear in normal gameplay. Some are half-finished designs, others early drafts of existing Pokémon. These hidden graphics reveal just how much experimentation occurred during development. For instance, alternate versions of familiar Pokémon feature slightly different poses, while completely unknown shapes hint at designs that were cut late in production. Decades later, fans still analyze these sprites like archaeologists in piecing together what might have been. Each one tells a quiet story about creativity constrained by technology and the countless ideas left behind on the cutting room floor. Even the wild Pokémon encounters in Red and Blue aren't as tidy as they seem. The data that determines which species appear in each area occasionally overlaps or is misindexed, leading to strange and unpredictable outcomes. In rare cases, this can cause Pokémon to appear in locations where they shouldn't or not appear at all. These quirks were the result of tight programming limits and hand-edited data tables, leaving room for small human errors. While invisible to most players, these imperfections give the games an organic, almost handmade feel, a reminder that even masterpieces have seams if you look closely enough. To save memory, many areas in Pokémon Red reuse the same base map structure, simply altering the visual tiles or decorations to make them feel unique. For example, two caves might share identical layouts, but with different walls, items, or lighting effects layered on top. This efficient approach gave the illusion of a vast, varied world, even though much of it was built from the same foundations. It's a testament to the developers' ingenuity. They managed to make a 1 megabyte cartridge feel like an entire country. The magic wasn't in sheer size, it was in how they disguised repetition as discovery. Golbat's original sprite in Pokémon Red is one of the most infamous designs from Generation Awesome. With its enormous open mouth and tiny body, it looks more like a horror creature than the sleek bat we know today. Fans have long joked that it seems capable of swallowing the player whole. The exaggerated proportions came from the limitations of the Game Boy's sprite system, where outlines and shading were difficult to balance. Despite its odd appearance, or perhaps because of it, Golbat's unsettling grin became a beloved piece of early Pokémon weirdness, a reminder of the series' experimental, hand-drawn beginnings. Charizard's original sprite in Pokémon Red was far more intimidating than the polished version most fans recognize today. Its body was bulkier, its wings smaller, and its expression fierce, almost monstrous. The early design gave it a stocky, dragon-like presence that emphasized raw strength over grace. Later generations would refine Charizard into a sleeker, more heroic figure, but this first appearance captured something primal. On the limited Game Boy screen, it looked like a creature that barely fit its own frame. That roughness, born from hardware constraints, gave the original sprite a kind of raw, untamed power. The gendered Pokémon pair, Nidoran female and Nidoran male, were a fascinating technical challenge for the developers. Because the Game Boy had limited memory, their sprites shared mirrored frames in certain menus to conserve space. Subtle differences, like the addition of whiskers or horn shape, were applied on top of the same base. This clever trick allowed Game Freak to represent gender distinctions years before the concept became standard in later generations. It's an early example of how creative design overcame hardware limits, resulting in two Pokémon that were distinct in lore but literally reflections of each other in code. In Lavender Town's ghost encounters, players often ran into strange question mark-shaped sprites that couldn't be identified or battled properly until acquiring the Sylph Scope. These apparitions added a chilling mystery to the game, faceless, untouchable enemies that left players guessing what they were seeing. Once the Sylph Scope was obtained, the ghosts were revealed to be ordinary Pokémon like Ghastly and Haunter, and the terrifying illusion vanished. It was a clever bit of psychological design, a technical limitation turned into storytelling. By hiding information, the game made the unknown feel eerie, showing that imagination can be the best scare of all. The missing no glitch didn't remain a secret for long. Once word spread of its ability to duplicate items, strategy guides, magazines, and playground rumors exploded with instructions on how to trigger it safely. Some guides even treated it as a hidden feature, describing the process step by step as though it were an official cheat code. Players used it to amass infinite rare candies, master balls, and nuggets, power once unthinkable. While Game Freak never intended it, missing nodes became part of the game's folklore. It blurred the line between glitch and gameplay, transforming an error into one of the most famous features in video game history. When Pokémon Red and Blue were re-released on the Nintendo 3DS Virtual Console, many players were surprised to find that several of the original glitches were still intact. Missing No, the item duplication trick, and the old man glitch all functioned just as they had in 1996. Rather than removing these quirks, Nintendo preserved them deliberately, honoring the authenticity of the experience. It was a rare move in modern gaming, allowing imperfections to remain as part of history. For fans, it felt like opening a perfectly preserved time capsule, a reminder that even the game's flaws were part of its enduring charm. The Pokémon Company quickly realized the power of mystery in building community, and no example proved that better than Mew. After rumors spread about its existence, the company leaned into the speculation by hosting official events where players could finally obtain the elusive Pokémon. Lines stretched for hours as fans brought their Game Boys to have Mew traded directly onto their cartridges. What began as an accidental secret turned into brilliant marketing. By treating Mew like a myth come to life, the Pokémon Company transformed curiosity into excitement and legend into one of the franchise's defining moments. Kanto's geography is filled with subtle, hidden connections that make the world feel interconnected and alive. One of the most clever examples is found in Saffron City, home to teleport pads that instantly move players between rooms. These hidden links create a sense of mystery and complexity, forcing players to think spatially instead of simply walking from one area to another. It was an early form of fast travel, disguised as a puzzle. Beyond its gameplay function, it reinforced the idea that technology and science were deeply woven into Pokémon's world, a recurring theme throughout Kanto's design philosophy. Even the underground areas and floors of Saffron's Sylph-Comber building reuse portions of the same map layouts, cleverly disguised by different walls and decorations. This trick allowed Game Freak to save memory while creating the illusion of a massive, sprawling facility. Players often didn't notice that some rooms were mirrored or recycled, as the teleport pad system constantly disoriented them. The combination of reused geometry and complex navigation gave Sylph Costa a labyrinthine quality that made it one of the most memorable challenges in the game. It was a puzzle of perception, one that worked because players never saw the repetition behind it. The teleport pads inside Sylph Co. served more than just a gameplay purpose. They were a way to work around technical limits. By using instant warps between rooms, the developers avoided loading long corridors or additional screens, reducing strain on the Game Boy's memory. Yet what could have been a dull optimization became one of the game's most unique mechanics. Players had to map their paths carefully, memorizing the strange warp patterns to reach Giovanni at the top. It was both a test of patience and spatial reasoning, a perfect example of necessity turned into creative design. The Pokémon storage system in the original Red and Blue was both innovative and frustrating. Players could store their Pokémon in numbered PC boxes, each with a limited capacity. However, once a box was full, you had to manually switch to a new one, and the game wouldn't warn you beforehand. Many players lost rare catches simply because their box had reached its limit. It was a harsh lesson in data management hidden inside a children's game. Despite its clunkiness, the system laid the foundation for one of Pokémon's most essential features, evolving into the smooth storage we take for granted today. Early development documents suggest that Game Freak originally planned for more than 151 Pokémon in red and green. Some cut creatures were likely dropped due to the Game Boy's strict memory limits, while others were incomplete designs that didn't make the deadline. Fragments of these lost Pokémon still exist within the game's data, partial sprites, unused names or placeholders that hint at what might have been. Over the years, fans have speculated about these unseen creatures, treating them like hidden fossils. The final 151 may have been a technical compromise, but it became a perfect, iconic number. In Japan, Pokémon Blue wasn't originally available in stores. It began as a special, mail-order-only edition released months after Red and Green. This version featured polished sprites, updated dialogue, and fewer bugs, improvements based on player feedback. Its exclusivity made it a collector's item, and it quietly became the foundation for the Western releases of Red and Blue. What started as a limited edition refinement evolved into the definitive version most of the world came to know. It's a fascinating reminder that Pokémon's international success grew out of what was, at first, a niche, fan-focused reissue. Pokémon Yellow arrived later as a love letter to the anime that had captured global audiences. Developed after the success of the TV show, it reimagined Kanto through the lens of Ash and Pikachu's story. The sprites were improved, gym leader teams adjusted, and dialogue rewritten to match the show's tone. It was more than a re-release. It was the first true director's cut of a Pokémon game. By blending elements of the anime with the structure of Red and Blue, Game Freak bridged two worlds, turning Yellow into a nostalgic crossover that delighted fans of both mediums. In Pokémon Yellow, Pikachu became your starter Pokémon, a direct nod to the anime. Unlike previous games, this Pikachu refused to stay in its Pokéball, instead following you around on screen. It even had a limited emotion system, turning to face you with different expressions depending on its happiness level. For many players, this small feature made Pikachu feel alive, a true companion rather than just a battle partner. It was an early experiment in emotional connection, a design philosophy that would resurface in later games. Through simple animations, Pokémon Yellow captured the heart of the series, friendship. In Pokémon Red and Blue, you're forced to make one of the toughest decisions in gaming, choosing between Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Once you pick, the other two are gone for good, unless you trade with friends. This limitation wasn't just a design choice, it was a deliberate way to encourage social interaction. Players needed each other to complete the Pokédex, which turned Pokémon from a solitary adventure into a community-driven experience. That single choice at Professor Oak's lab carried emotional weight, shaping your journey and symbolizing the game's central theme: you can't catch them all alone. The Game Boy's tiny 8-bit CPU pushed Game Freak's programmers to their absolute limits. With so little processing power, every line of code had to be optimized and repurposed. The developers used creative shortcuts, like overlapping data and recycling memory, to make the world of Kanto function smoothly. Even the battle system and menu navigation relied on tricks to keep performance stable. These constraints didn't just shape Pokémon's technical design, they shaped its soul. The limitations forced the team to be inventive, squeezing an entire living world into hardware that could barely display 4 shades of gray. Not every line of dialogue in Pokémon Red and Blue made perfect sense. Some NPC text survived the localization process unchanged, resulting in typos, awkward grammar, and odd phrasing. Famous examples include, "You are 10 years old, aren't you?" and "A girl may be bad if she raises Pokémon too." These quirks became part of the charm, revealing how rushed the translation process was for a game of this size. The localization team had limited time and resources, yet their work gave Pokémon its distinctive tone, a mix of sincerity, strangeness, and humor that fans still quote decades later. Pokémon Red and Blue were built entirely using tile-based graphics, tiny, reusable squares that formed the world's landscapes, buildings, and interiors. This method was essential for fitting Kanto onto a small cartridge. Instead of drawing large, unique backgrounds, the developers assembled the world like a mosaic, repeating patterns in clever ways to create variety. The same handful of tiles formed everything from forests to cities, yet the player rarely noticed. This technique gave Pokémon its distinctive visual rhythm and compact charm. The grid-based design also became a foundation for how future handheld RPGs would build their worlds efficiently. Because of the Game Boy's strict hardware limitations, battle animations in Pokémon Red are incredibly minimal. Attacks were represented by flashes, simple movement patterns, or static images shaking on the screen. Despite their simplicity, these effects carried impact. You didn't need elaborate visuals to feel the tension of a battle. Players filled in the rest with imagination, interpreting those quick blinks and sound effects as bursts of elemental power. What began as a technical necessity ended up defining the series' early style, restrained but evocative, letting the player's mind turn minimalism into something grand. Trainer sprites in Pokémon Red and Blue were cleverly reused across multiple towns, often with simple palette swaps to suggest different characters. For example, the same sprite might represent both a bug catcher in Viridian Forest and a fisherman along the coast, only their colors or dialogue changed. This reuse wasn't laziness. It was an efficient way to conserve memory on the Game Boy's limited cartridge space. By adjusting color tones and context, the developers created a world that felt populated without needing hundreds of unique designs. It's an early example of how thoughtful simplicity can make a small world feel vast. Each badge earned from a gym in Pokémon Red carried more meaning than just proof of victory. Badges often unlocked the use of specific hidden machines HMs outside of battle, granting new abilities like Surf or Strength. This design cleverly tied progression to exploration. Earning a badge didn't just make your Pokémon stronger, it expanded your world. Suddenly, rivers became highways and boulders turned into puzzles. These badges weren't just symbols of achievement. They were keys that encouraged backtracking and discovery. Every new HM felt like gaining access to a hidden layer of Kanto, rewarding persistence and curiosity. The link cable was a revolutionary piece of hardware for its time. Before Pokémon, handheld consoles were largely solo experiences, but the link cable changed that forever. For the first time, players could physically connect their Game Boys to trade Pokémon or battle each other directly. The feature turned a single-player RPG into a shared social phenomenon. It wasn't just a cable, it was a bridge between worlds. Kids gathered on playgrounds and buses, forming connections through technology that felt almost magical. This tiny wire became the foundation for Pokémon's global community, and one of the defining inventions in gaming history. The Old Man Glitch is one of the most famous quirks in Pokémon Red and Blue, and the player's chosen name plays a major role in it. When you talk to the old man in Viridian City to learn how to catch Pokémon, the game temporarily replaces your name data to display his tutorial text. Later, when you surf along Cinnabar Island, the game mistakenly uses your name's data to generate wild Pokémon encounters. The letters in your name translate into specific Pokémon based on their internal values. It's a bizarre intersection of programming and identity. Your name literally shapes your world. In Pokémon Red and Blue, stat changes during battle, like boosts from Swords Dance or drops from Growl, are governed by a simple linear system known as stat stages. Each stage represents a fixed multiplier that increases or decreases a Pokémon's stat by a specific percentage. Unlike later generations, where these values were finely tuned, Generation 1's system was straightforward but unforgiving. High-level stat boosts could make certain Pokémon unstoppable, while debuffs stacked quickly to devastating effect. This simplicity gave battles a raw, mathematical feel, easy to grasp, yet full of potential for wild, unexpected outcomes. Status effects in Pokémon Red were far harsher than in modern games, adding an extra layer of tension to every battle. Sleep, for instance, could last multiple turns, with no reliable indicator of when your Pokémon would wake up. Sometimes, you'd sit helplessly as the opponent struck again and again, unable to fight back. Paralysis drastically reduced speed, often turning fast Pokémon into sluggish targets, while poison steadily drained health even between turns. These punishing mechanics made battles unpredictable and dangerous, teaching players to respect status moves. Victory in Kanto wasn't just about power, it was about endurance and preparation. Poison was one of the most unforgiving status effects in Pokémon Red. Unlike later generations, where its effects were confined to battle, poison continued damaging your Pokémon as you walked through the overworld. Each step chipped away at their HP, and the screen would flash ominously to signal their suffering. Many players remember the dread of racing back to a Pokémon Center, only to see their last team member faint just before reaching the door. It was a small but powerful detail, a constant reminder that the world of Pokémon wasn't always forgiving, even outside of combat. Pokémon Red's menus, while simple, were built on fragile code structures that reused buffer space to store temporary data. Occasionally, leftover bits of information from battles or item lists would leak into other screens, causing odd text or graphical errors. These weren't major crashes, just strange, fleeting moments when the game seemed to glitch out slightly. To players, these anomalies added an element of mystery, as though the cartridge had a mind of its own. In truth, they were the result of tight memory management, proof of how close the game always ran to the limits of its tiny hardware. Every wild Pokémon in Red and Blue has a base catch rate, an invisible number that determines how easy or difficult it is to capture. Combined with factors like the Pokémon's remaining HP, any inflicted status conditions, and the type of Pokéball used, this number drives the game's capture formula. It's why a weakened and paralyzed Pokémon is far easier to catch than one at full health. Though most players never saw the math behind it, this simple system created unforgettable tension, the moment of suspense between the Pokéball's final shake and the sound of success. The catch rate formula in Pokémon Red and Blue was elegantly simple compared to later games. It relied on only a few variables: the Pokémon's base catch rate, its current HP, any applied status condition, and the type of Pokéball used. There were no bonuses for special throws or hidden modifiers, just raw probability. This simplicity made capturing Pokémon feel pure and direct. Every battle became a small gamble between luck and strategy. Whether it was the thrill of catching a legendary or the frustration of watching a lowly Pidgey break free, the mechanic's simplicity amplified the emotional highs and lows of the hunt. Not every Pokémon in Generation 1 was built for battle. Some creatures, despite their charm, had almost no defensive viability because of low stats, poor move pools, or bad type matchups. Pokémon like Butterfree, Beedrill, and Raticate often fell behind quickly once the mid-game began. Their defenses were too weak to survive strong attacks, and they lacked the moves needed to fight back. This imbalance wasn't intentional. It was a side effect of how Game Freak was still experimenting with battle mechanics. Yet for many players, using these weaker Pokémon became an act of loyalty, proving that love could overcome stats. EVE introduced one of the most fascinating mechanics in Pokémon Red, branching evolution. Depending on which elemental stone you used, EVE could evolve into Vaporeon, Jolteon, or Flareon, representing water, lightning, and fire. This concept of choice made evolution feel personal, giving players control over how their Pokémon developed. Each form came with distinct stats and strengths, encouraging experimentation. For many players, choosing Eevee's path felt like shaping destiny. This innovation would inspire future generations to explore alternate evolutions, but in 1996 it was a revolutionary idea. One Pokémon, 3 possible futures. Haunter's evolution into Gengar was one of the earliest examples of trade-based evolution in Pokémon Red. To complete the transformation, players had to physically connect 2 Game Boys with a link cable and trade the Pokémon away, trusting that their friend would return it. It was a bold mechanic that made social play essential. Golbat, however, wouldn't gain its evolution into Crobat until Generation 2, leaving it stuck as an awkward middle-tier Pokémon in Red and Blue. These early trade evolutions reinforced Pokémon's central theme, connection and trust. To make your team stronger, you sometimes had to let go. The original Game Boy's lack of color presented a major artistic challenge for the Pokémon team. With only 4 shades of gray to work with, artists had to rely on creative shading, bold outlines, and careful contrast to make each Pokémon distinct. Details like scales, feathers, and facial expressions were represented through texture rather than hue. Despite these limitations, the sprites conveyed surprising depth and personality. Players could instantly recognize each creature, even in monochrome. The art team's mastery of light and shadow made Pokémon feel alive, a triumph of design over constraint that defined the Game Boy era. To overcome the Game Boy's severe graphical limits, artists used a clever technique known as dithering, alternating light and dark pixels to create the illusion of extra shades. This trick gave Pokémon sprites texture, suggesting smoothness, fur, or depth where none technically existed. By arranging dots and patterns, artists simulated gradients and made flat images appear more detailed. When viewed on the Game Boy's small screen, the effect was surprisingly convincing. Dithering was a quiet art form, invisible to most players, but it allowed Pokémon to look far more expressive than the hardware should have allowed, pure ingenuity in pixels. Wild Pokémon encounters in caves were designed to feel noticeably tougher than those found above ground. As players descended into darker areas like Mount, Moon, or Rock Tunnel, they faced higher level enemies with trickier abilities and more frequent ambushes. This sharp jump in difficulty wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate way to teach endurance and resource management. The oppressive encounter rate and limited visibility forced players to plan their routes and conserve healing items. Caves in Pokémon Red weren't just obstacles, they were tests of patience and courage and preparation, each step deeper, bringing a sense of both danger and discovery. Many players never realized just how rare some Pokémon truly were. Creatures like Dratini, Kangaskhan, and Chansey had extremely low spawn rates, often below 5%, and sometimes as low as 1%. Finding them became an act of luck and persistence. Long before official data was available, kids relied on playground rumors or half-truths from guidebooks to guess where and how these elusive Pokémon appeared. The scarcity made catching them feel like a genuine accomplishment. For those lucky enough to reel in a Dratini from the Safari Zone, it wasn't just a catch, it was a story worth bragging about. The world map in Pokémon Red was built on a compact grid system, and to save memory, many of its edges looped or mirrored existing areas. This meant that when you thought you were exploring entirely new regions, you were sometimes walking across reused or flipped data. The technique made the Game Boy cartridge feel larger than it was, giving Kanto a sense of continuity and vastness. The transitions between routes and towns felt seamless, masking the fact that the world was stitched together from repeating patterns. It was clever design disguised as exploration, invisible magic on a tiny screen. Within the game's code, each area's wild encounter data includes several dummy slots, blank entries that exist solely to maintain consistent data structures. These placeholders ensure that every route or cave uses the same format, even if fewer species appear there. Without them, the game's memory would become unstable. In most cases, these blank slots are harmless, but when glitches occur, the game sometimes attempts to read them, resulting in bizarre encounters or graphical errors. It's one of many subtle programming tricks that kept the fragile Game Boy code from collapsing under its own complexity. The Safari Zone in Pokémon Red broke nearly every rule of the game's traditional battle system. Once inside, players couldn't use their own Pokémon or items, only special Safari balls, bait, and rocks. These tools introduced a new kind of randomness, where catching a Pokémon depended on both chance and behavior. Rare creatures like Tauros and Chansey could flee at any moment, adding tension to every throw. The change in mechanics made the Safari Zone feel wild and unpredictable, as if the player were truly stepping into untamed nature. It was frustrating, exhilarating, and completely unlike anything else in Kanto. The Safari Zone isn't just home to rare Pokémon. It also hides one of Pokémon Red's strangest little side quests. Deep inside, players can find a set of gold teeth belonging to the warden of the Fuchsia City's Safari office. Returning them earns you the strength HM, an essential tool for progressing through the game. It's an odd, almost comical quest, a mix of humor and practicality. The warden's mumbling dialogue before you return his teeth added a touch of silliness that balanced the otherwise stressful safari experience, reminding players that even in a world full of danger, Pokémon had charm. Catching rare Pokémon in the Safari Zone was a true test of patience and luck. Species like Chansey, Tauros, and Kangaskhan had incredibly low encounter rates, sometimes appearing in just 1 out of every 100 steps. And even when found, they often fled before players could throw more than a single safari ball. These encounters became legendary among fans, especially before data mining revealed the exact probabilities. For many, finally catching one of these elusive creatures wasn't just a gameplay achievement, it was a rite of passage, proof of persistence, and perhaps a bit of well-earned luck. The Master Ball in Pokémon Red was unlike any other item in the game. It was a one-of-a-kind Pokeball with a 100% success rate, guaranteeing a capture no matter the target's health or level. Because there was only one in the entire game, players agonized over when to use it. Some saved it for the ultimate encounter with Mewtwo, while others risked it on legendary birds, or even wasted it on common Pokemon by accident. The tension surrounding that single throw, to use or to save, turned a simple item into one of the most memorable choices in gaming history. The decision of when to use the Master Ball became one of Pokémon Red's most universal player dilemmas. Some trainers hoarded it forever, too afraid to waste it on the wrong Pokémon. Others used it impulsively, regretting it later when they faced Mewtwo deep within Cerulean Cave. The game never explicitly told you that there was only one, leaving the realization to hit naturally, often too late. This emotional tug-of-war between caution and temptation perfectly captured Pokemon's balance between luck and strategy. The Master Ball wasn't just an item, it was a quiet psychological experiment in player restraint. Team Rocket's grunts in Pokémon Red had far more personality than typical video game henchmen of the era. Instead of being faceless, silent enemies, they cracked jokes, taunted the player, and even complained about their own failures. Their quirky one-liners like, "We're pulling a big job here, get lost, kid," made them oddly memorable. Each encounter added flavor to the world, showing that even villains had humor and humanity. This playful tone helped define Team Rocket as more than just generic bad guys. They became iconic, paving the way for their later comedic fame in the anime as lovable, bumbling antagonists. Some gym leader dialogues in Pokémon Red and Blue are reused or slightly altered between versions, often for reasons of translation or space saving. For instance, certain victory lines or pre-battle speeches differ by only a few words, while others are rearranged entirely to fit English grammar. This reuse wasn't lazy writing. It was a practical way to minimize the text stored on the cartridge. The small tweaks give each version subtle personality differences, and for fans comparing lines between games, it's like spotting alternate takes of a familiar scene. Even dialogue was optimized for efficiency, yet still managed to feel memorable. Due to the Game Boy's technical limits, the animations for attacks in Pokémon Red were extremely minimal. The game didn't have a dedicated animation for each move. Instead, several shared the same basic visual effect. A simple flash or screen shake might represent tackle, bite, or slash, depending on context. Even elemental attacks often relied on identical frames with just a sound effect changes. Despite this simplicity, the clever pairing of visuals and audio convinced players they were seeing something unique each time. The imagination did the rest, turning a few blinking pixels into vivid mental images of battle. Behind Pokémon Red's systems lies a remarkable web of efficiency. Rather than using complex, branching code to handle every individual rule, the game relies heavily on lookup tables, compact lists that store pre-calculated values. These tables control everything from evolution paths to base stats and encounter rates. When the game needs data, it simply looks up the relevant entry rather than computing it from scratch. This approach drastically reduced processing time and memory use, allowing the Game Boy to handle hundreds of unique interactions. It's a subtle, elegant bit of programming that made an entire world fit inside a handheld. Because of the Game Boy's limited data handling, Pokémon Red is prone to mathematical quirks like integer overflow. When certain calculations, like experience gain, exceed the maximum value the game can store, the number wraps around to something nonsensical, sometimes even turning negative. This phenomenon created the infamous EXP underflow glitch, where a Pokémon could instantly jump to level 100 or crash the game's logic entirely. While unintentional, these quirks became part of the game's mythos. They remind players that even a simple battle can brush against the limits of an old machine trying to hold an entire world. Pokémon Red's random number generator, the invisible system that determines events like critical hits and wild encounters, is surprisingly linear and predictable. Instead of true randomness, it cycles through a fixed mathematical sequence. Under certain conditions, knowledgeable players can manipulate it, for example, by controlling inputs or timing actions to influence outcomes like wild Pokémon spawns or critical hits. Most players never noticed, but speedrunners and glitch researchers later discovered how deterministic the system really was. In a game that feels built on luck, it's fascinating to realize that every roll of the dice was quietly written in code all along. Pallet Town, your quiet starting point in Pokémon Red, is one of the simplest maps in the entire game. Just a few houses, a small patch of grass, and a path leading north. Yet this minimalist design was intentional. It gave players room to learn the controls, explore safely, and experience a calm before the adventure began. The town's peaceful music and symmetry made it feel like home, a place to return to after long journeys. Its simplicity wasn't a limitation. It was a design choice that created a sense of nostalgia so powerful, it still defines the series' tone. In Pokémon Red, many objects that appear purely decorative, like trees, rocks, and signs, actually serve as invisible barriers. Some block off entire areas until players acquire the right tools, or HMs, such as Cut or Surf. These obstacles subtly guided exploration without explicit tutorials, encouraging curiosity and backtracking. Players often assumed these elements were just scenery until discovering their hidden purpose. It was a clever way of blending world design with progression, teaching players that not everything in Kanto could be accessed right away, and that patience and growth were part of the journey. Invisible collision tiles are scattered all throughout Kanto, often in places that look like open ground. Players would occasionally bump into invisible walls, unsure whether they'd found a secret or a bug. These tiles existed to align map edges, define water boundaries, or prevent the player from walking into broken areas of the map. On the Game Boy's tiny screen, it was an efficient way to maintain structure in a grid-based world. While occasionally frustrating, these invisible walls were quiet reminders of the technical balancing act behind Pokémon's smooth illusion of freedom and exploration. Every Pokémon in Red and Blue has its own distinctive cry, but these sounds were created within the Game Boy's severe audio limits. Each cry was a short, lo-fi burst of beeps and tones generated by the system's primitive sound chip. Despite the simplicity, the developers managed to give every Pokémon a unique voice, from Pikachu's cheerful chirp to Onix's deep, distorted rumble. These cries were iconic not for their realism, but for their character. They captured emotion through minimalism, proving that even a few electronic notes could make players feel connected to their Pokémon companions. Due to hardware constraints, many Pokémon cries in Red and Blue are actually reused or slightly altered versions of others. The development team adjusted pitch, length, or tone to create the illusion of variety without needing hundreds of unique sound files. For example, Charizard and Rhyhorn share nearly identical cries, as do Poliwag and Ditto. This recycling was a necessity. The Game Boy simply didn't have enough memory to store 151 entirely distinct sounds. Yet somehow, the variations were convincing enough that few players ever noticed. It's another testament to how creative limitations can spark lasting illusion and charm. Inside Pokémon Red's code, every Pokémon cry is stored in a compact, compressed format to save space. The Game Boy had extremely limited audio memory, so each cry was generated through algorithmic data rather than being stored as full sound files. Essentially, the game contains instructions on how to play a cry, not the audio itself. This method let 151 unique cries fit into just a few kilobytes of memory. It's a brilliant example of efficiency. Instead of storing sound, the developers stored music sheets for machines. The result was iconic, small bursts of sound that became instantly recognizable worldwide. The battle backgrounds in Pokémon Red might seem varied, but many are reused across multiple areas. For example, certain towns share the same simple backdrop of grass or city tiles, while caves and ocean battles recycle nearly identical visuals. These backgrounds weren't meant to represent specific locations, but to suggest an atmosphere, whether grassy fields, mountain passes, or open water. By using the same assets cleverly, Game Freak created the illusion of diversity without overloading the Game Boy's limited video memory. Each battle felt fresh enough, even if, technically, you were fighting in the same field every time. Early development builds of Pokémon Red and Green suggest that the Pewter City Gym may have originally looked or functioned differently. Design notes and prototype screenshots hint at an alternate layout and even a possible variation in gym leader types before Brock's rock theme was finalized. Game Freak iterated heavily during production, constantly adjusting gym balance to introduce type mechanics naturally. Brock's gym eventually became the perfect introduction to Pokemon's battle system, a tough but fair test of type matchups. Still, these early plans show how fluid development was, with ideas constantly reshaped to fit memory and pacing constraints. The Pokédex limit of 151 Pokémon wasn't arbitrary. It aligned perfectly with the Game Boy's internal indexing system. Each Pokémon is assigned a unique numerical ID, stored as an 8-bit value. This allows for a maximum of 256 entries, but with reserved slots for glitch data and unused memory, the safe functional range ended at 151. That neat cutoff gave Pokémon Red a sense of completeness, while still hinting that more creatures might exist beyond the known number. It's a technical limitation, that became a storytelling device, the idea that the world was vast, but just slightly out of reach. The trade link system in Pokémon Red was revolutionary for its time, but also fragile. To prevent corrupted trades or invalid data transfers, the game included built-in validation checks. When two Game Boys connected via link cable, the software compared Pokémon data, species ID, level, moves, and ownership to ensure everything aligned correctly before finalizing the exchange. This was crucial to prevent crashes or the creation of glitch Pokémon. Though primitive, it was an early form of error handling in multiplayer gaming. The fact that trades could happen so smoothly on 8-bit hardware was nothing short of a technical miracle. In Pokémon Red and Blue, some NPCs strangely mention Pokémon or events that don't actually exist in the final games. These small inconsistencies were likely remnants of earlier development drafts, where dialogue hadn't been fully updated. For instance, certain trainers or scientists hint at creatures or encounters never seen by players, fueling speculation about hidden content. To kids in the 1990s, these odd lines weren't just oversights, they were tantalizing mysteries. Many believed they pointed to secret Pokémon or undiscovered areas. What were simple text errors became seeds for playground rumors, transforming ordinary lines of dialogue into whispers of legend. Like many early Game Boy titles, Pokémon Red's codebase once contained debug text and test messages used by developers during production. Most were deleted before release, but a few slipped through into early builds or prototypes. These fragments include strange placeholder names, test coordinates, or untranslated Japanese notes. While invisible to normal players, data miners later unearthed them, offering rare glimpses into the chaotic, hands-on development process. It's like peeking behind the curtain of a magician's act, reminders that the polished world of Pokémon was built through trial, error, and clever engineering on a tiny cartridge. During localization, many Pokémon went through multiple proposed English names before the final versions were chosen. Some early drafts used literal translations from Japanese, while others leaned into puns or wordplay that didn't quite fit. For example, Charmander and Squirtle were among the earliest to stick, but others, like Gyarados or Jinx, had several alternates. The localization team had to balance memorability, pronunciation, and cultural context for Western audiences. These name changes helped shape how global fans connected with Pokémon, proving that good localization isn't just translation, it's storytelling adapted to every language. The famous "gotta catch 'em all" slogan wasn't just marketing, it was built directly into the game's design. Pokémon Red and Blue deliberately split certain species between versions, making it impossible to complete the Pokédex without trading. This idea was revolutionary at the time, turning what could have been a solo RPG into a shared social challenge. Players compared notes, negotiated trades, and formed real-world communities around filling their Pokédexes. The slogan captured the spirit perfectly: collection through connection. What seemed like a simple tagline became a cultural mantra that still defines the franchise decades later. For many players, encountering a glitch like missing No didn't break the illusion of the game, it deepened it. Finding something forbidden, hidden in the code, felt like discovering a living secret inside the cartridge. The strange shapes, distorted cries, and side effects like infinite item duplication gave Pokémon Red an eerie, almost mythical quality. Kids whispered about what missing No meant. Was it a lost Pokémon, a ghost, or something else entirely? In a world already built on discovery, glitches blurred the line between fiction and reality. They turned Pokémon from a simple adventure into a playground of mystery and imagination. Pokémon Red's world design masterfully encourages backtracking, a rare feature for handheld games of its time. As players earn new HMs or items like Cuts, Surf, or Strength, previously inaccessible areas become open again. This looping structure rewards curiosity and memory, turning old routes into new adventures. Returning to Viridian Forest or Cerulean Cave with a stronger team feels both nostalgic and empowering. It gives Kanto a living sense of continuity, a world that grows with you. What might first seem like linear progression reveals itself as a cleverly interconnected map, subtly teaching players exploration and reward through design. Many bridges, caves, and buildings in Pokémon Red only become accessible after earning certain badges or items, reinforcing a tangible sense of progress. Each new tool, whether it's the Boulder Badge granting strength or the Cascade Badge allowing cut, feels like unlocking a hidden layer of the world. These restrictions also encourage pacing, ensuring players can't rush ahead unprepared. When a once blocked cave or locked gate finally opens, it feels earned through both skill and perseverance. The design mimics real adventure stories, each obstacle overcome not just by power, but by experience and exploration. Kanto's map borders are far more sophisticated than they appear. To conserve space and memory, developers cleverly blended tile transitions between areas to disguise data boundaries. When moving from one route to another, the game quietly loads and unloads small chunks of map data, but the transitions are seamless. Grass tiles, fences, and road edges are deliberately arranged to mask the handoff. This illusion of continuity made the world feel huge, even though it was stitched together from small, reusable pieces. It's an early example of masterful world optimization, invisible craftsmanship that most players never even noticed. In Pokémon Red, some NPCs stand on what appear to be empty or ghost tiles, invisible placeholders used for movement or pathing control. These tiles let characters like wandering trainers or walking townsfolk follow predetermined routes without colliding with the player or scenery. Occasionally, these ghost positions could cause odd visual bugs or invisible obstructions if misaligned. To most players, they went unnoticed, but they reveal how the game simulated a living world within tight memory limits. These unseen mechanics gave towns a sense of rhythm and life, turning static maps into believable spaces full of quiet, moving inhabitants. The link cable, essential for Pokémon battles and trades, was more than just a wire. It introduced one of the earliest examples of real-time synchronization between handheld devices. To prevent data loss or desyncs, the Game Boy hardware used handshake protocols, tiny signals confirming that both consoles were ready to send and receive data. This created a slight, noticeable delay before trades or battles began, ensuring stability. At a time when multiplayer on portable devices was nearly unheard of, Pokémon made it feel effortless. That little pause before trading wasn't lag, it was communication, proof of a technological first. The Japanese versions of Pokémon Red and Green differ subtly from their Western counterparts, not just in language, but in naming and ordering. Several Pokemon have entirely different Japanese names, such as Hitokage for Charmander or Fushigadon for Bulbasaur. Even the Pokédex order varies slightly in early data structures, reflecting development changes between versions. These names often draw from Japanese wordplay, cultural references, or mythological themes that didn't translate neatly into English. When localized, Game Freak and Nintendo of America reimagined many of them to be more intuitive for Western audiences, creating iconic names that would resonate globally for decades. Pokémon Red and Green were created by a remarkably small and dedicated team at Game Freak, led by Satoshi Tajiri. The core group was fewer than a dozen people, with Junichi Masuda handling music and programming, Ken Sugimori illustrating every single Pokémon, and Tajiri overseeing design and direction. This tight-knit team worked long hours for years, driven by their shared love of collecting insects, a childhood hobby that directly inspired the concept of catching Pokémon. Despite limited resources and skepticism from publishers, they managed to craft a game that redefined what handheld gaming could be. The overwhelming success of Pokémon Red and Blue transformed Game Freak from a small niche developer into one of the most influential studios in gaming history. Before Pokémon, Game Freak had struggled financially, but Red and Blue's innovative design, blending exploration, collection, and social interaction, changed everything. The game's popularity proved that handheld RPGs could deliver deep, long-lasting engagement. Game Freak's unique approach to world building, character design, and emergent gameplay became a model for countless developers afterward. From near obscurity, the studio's name became synonymous with creativity, perseverance, and the birth of a cultural phenomenon. Pokémon Red and Blue's global impact can't be overstated. Together, the games sold over 30 million copies worldwide, making them among the best-selling titles in history. What began as a modest Japanese release grew into a full-blown cultural movement. The simple idea of catching them all became a shared language among kids everywhere, crossing national and linguistic boundaries. Red and Blue's universal appeal lay in their blend of adventure, friendship, and discovery. This success didn't just launch a franchise, it redefined gaming as a social, emotional experience, proving that even the smallest device could hold an infinite world. From those original Game Boy cartridges, the Pokémon franchise grew into one of the largest multimedia empires ever created. The anime, trading cards, movies, and merchandise all stem from the foundations built by Pokémon Red and Blue. Pikachu's global stardom, Ash's journey, and even the concept of battling with friends all trace back to these first games. They established the formula, collect, connect, and compete, that still drives the brand today. Few could have predicted that a simple RPG about trading monsters would become a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. Yet everything, the lore, the legacy, the nostalgia, began right here in Kanto. When Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green released in 2004 for the Game Boy Advance, they weren't just nostalgic remakes, they were complete technical overhauls. These versions reworked core systems, like the split between special attack and special defense, modernizing the once flawed special stat from Generation 1. The improved graphics, smoother battle engine, and added features such as wireless trading made them feel both familiar and fresh. Fire Red and Leaf Green successfully bridged generations of players, preserving the charm of Kanto while upgrading it to match the standards of newer Pokémon games. They proved nostalgia and innovation could coexist beautifully. The original Pokémon Red and Blue were known for their numerous quirks and glitches, from Missing No to the Old Man exploit. But when Fire Red and Leaf Green arrived, nearly all of these unintended bugs were fixed or removed. While some players missed the unpredictability of the originals, the cleaned-up code created a more stable experience. Moves worked properly, stats behaved as intended, and the game no longer risked corrupting your save data. It marked a turning point for Game Freak's technical precision, trading in the charming chaos of the early days for refined, reliable gameplay that set a lasting standard. Pokémon Yellow, released in Japan in 1998 and internationally in 1999, served as a bridge between the games and the anime series. In this version, Pikachu becomes your starter and refuses to stay in its Pokéball, following you visibly on screen. Its happiness can be checked by turning to face it, adding an emotional touch that made your bond feel real. Other features, like redesigned gym leaders and updated Team Rocket encounters, reflected the show's influence. Pokémon Yellow wasn't just an enhanced edition, it was the first attempt to blend narrative and mechanics, connecting the game's universe with its animated counterpart. Even decades later, Pokémon Red continues to captivate fans who explore its inner workings. Dedicated data miners and ROM researchers still dig through the original game's code, uncovering unused sprites, half-finished features, and hints of what might have been. These findings include scrapped Pokémon designs, experimental items, and early prototypes of moves. Every discovery feels like opening a time capsule, a glimpse into Game Freak's creative process during the franchise's infancy. The fact that, nearly 30 years on, people are still uncovering secrets in those tiny cartridges shows just how much life still hides inside Kanto's data. Many fan-created what-if Pokémon designs are directly inspired by unused or prototype data found in the original Red and Green ROMs. Early concept sprites, discovered through data mining, include alternate evolutions, strange hybrids, and creatures that were later refined into familiar faces. Artists and enthusiasts have reimagined these lost designs, giving form to the Pokémon that never officially existed, a ghostly parallel Pokédex. These community reconstructions blur the line between canon and fan creativity. In a sense, they extend Game Freak's original imagination, proving that even the ideas left behind continue to inspire new stories, art, and speculation to this day. The cultural phenomenon known as Twitch Plays Pokémon began in 2014, and it all started with Pokémon Red. Through a clever setup, thousands of Twitch viewers could input commands simultaneously via chat, collectively controlling the same character in real time. What followed was pure chaos, endless wandering, accidental releases of beloved Pokémon, and miraculous victories born from randomness. Yet somehow the crowd managed to beat the game. This social experiment turned Pokémon Red into something new, part comedy, part sociology, and part miracle. It proved that even decades later, Kanto could still bring millions of people together through shared chaos. At its peak, Twitch Plays Pokémon drew over 1 million participants, making it one of the largest crowdsourced gaming events in history. Strangers across the world typed up, down, start, and A in chat, creating unpredictable yet oddly cooperative progress. The community developed its own mythology, idolizing Pokémon like Bird Jesus and Lord Helix. It was more than a stream. It became a digital religion, a collective storytelling experience built on a decades-old game. Pokémon Red, once a solo adventure, transformed into a living piece of performance art, uniting people through absurdity, nostalgia, and determination. The protagonist of Pokémon Red, known simply as Red, began as the embodiment of the silent player archetype, a blank slate for players to project themselves onto. Yet over time, this quiet boy became something more, a legend. In fan circles, Red represents mastery, the ultimate trainer who speaks through action, not words. His stoic demeanor, unshakable confidence, and simple design turned him into an icon of determination. While originally just a player avatar, Red evolved into a mythic figure, symbolizing the spirit of every player who once began their journey in that little town called Pallet. Red's mythic status was cemented when he reappeared as a hidden boss in Pokémon Gold, Silver, and Crystal atop Mount. Silver. Standing silently at the mountain's peak, surrounded by snow, he awaits challengers with a level 80 Pikachu and his original Kanto team. The battle is brutal, not just mechanically, but emotionally. You aren't just fighting a trainer, you're facing your younger self, the ghost of every adventure you've ever had. It's one of the most powerful moments in Pokemon's history. A quiet, wordless confrontation between nostalgia, mastery, and time itself. Even though Pokémon Red is nearly 3 decades old, it remains alive, a digital fossil still being studied and explored. Fans continue to experiment with its code, test its boundaries, and uncover secrets hidden deep in its data. From glitch hunts to randomizers and speedruns, the game has become a playground for creativity and discovery. Every time someone boots up a cartridge or emulator, Kanto breathes again. It's both a finished product and a living organism, a piece of gaming history that continues to evolve long after its creators moved on, proving true immortality can exist in pixels. And so, as we leave Kanto behind once more, it's clear that Pokémon Red is more than just a game. It's a memory shared by millions. Every glitch in every battle, every note of its 8-bit soundtrack still echoes decades later. What began as a tiny adventure on a green-tinted screen became a cultural landmark, still inspiring curiosity and connection to this day. Whether you were there in 1996 or discovered it years later, the magic remains the same. Thank you for joining me tonight, and until our next journey, may your Pokeballs always land true.